But it's tough. I do believe, strong documentary sees the action unfolding before the camera. So we do our utmost to make sure that we're as, as there as much as we can. But also, we have the situation now where almost everything gets filmed, and there's lots of news outlets and so on. So you've just got to also have a very healthy archive budget. The archive for this film, I think, cost in the region of about $100,000. So it wasn't cheap. But yeah, we're lucky enough to have a couple of cameras, 4 or 5 people on hand in the company, 2 of whom shoot. I shoot a little bit. So yeah, that's a quick answer to that question, hopefully. That's always the problem. So our films, we're not discerning when something happens. If we think something's happening, we're there and we shoot it. And the big job here, which took up tens of terabytes, was the 90 days we spent at the Commission of Inquiry. We spent 90 days out of 180 days of hearings, and wading through that again is a big job. So you need editors with stamina, you need assistant editors, and you need a lot of drive space, which especially when you're recording at 4K. So this was a 36 terabyte project. Does that make sense to anyone? if that makes sense to anyone, what 36? Absolutely. I think legacy journalism is really rare these days, where you get real quality journalism. And that's largely to do with the fragmentation of the media landscape and the disruption the internet has caused. But we've still got, those who are hanging on in there, independent, often investigative reporting units, which are really leading the way. And it's just that the print media, the print press, the physical space is getting less and less revenue because of this shared advertising revenue across the internet and other platforms and so on. So and then the proliferation of social media, where anybody can set up a website, make it look like a news site, spin their own narrative, their counter narrative often, and this is what we're seeing the elites reverting to in order to undermine, quality journalism and truth based on factual evidence. So we're in a dangerous space, and the journalists, certainly in our case, and I'm sure in many other countries, particularly in the global south, are the only ones really that are provide that space to interrogate, to reflect, to critically engage society, and foster those key skills, those critical judgment skills, so critical thinking skills. And I just looked at them in admiration, and this certainly was the biggest story to break in post-apartheid South Africa, and wanted to cover it from the get-go. So that's what we did, and we filmed over 2 years, and I think we saw these journalists go through hell and high water. So it makes for a better film and stronger film when we see those character arcs. Well, certainly I use South Africa, and have done so over the last 10 years. I mean, it took me 6, 7 years before I tried to bite off my own country. It's very complex and fragmented and disjointed and difficult. Critiquing your own government when it's essentially a new democracy. That said, I try and use, when I say we try and use South Africa as a landscape, it's to issues that are essentially quite universal. So the Fees Must Fall film, well, you know, students around the world were beginning to rise up around tuition fees. This corruption isn't something which is really only happens in Africa. Many of us would like to believe, or it's portrayed as that. It's a problem of African leadership. This is a problem of the international system as it's been set up, increasingly so over the last 30 years, where we've seen deregulation become the order of the day, and consequently a tremendous blurring of the spheres of the public and private. So it is in many ways a story about our world today. That said, the new film is about South Africa and the US, and we look at the parallels in discord and the fights around access to drugs with HIV, and again, the parallels with COVID, with PEE and now the vaccines and so on and so forth, and the tension between politics and science. And I think you would probably agree that that is one of the major issues of our time, given we're living in the age of catastrophes with climate change and pandemics. This is not the first to come. So that's the work I'm setting myself going forward, is really work around the environment, the climate crisis, global heating, and doing what I can to tell powerful stories which bring forth people's agency around the issue of the climate and ecological crisis that we are facing as a planet. This requires global solutions. It's a global threat which requires global solutions. So that's where I'm heading. Well, the Guptas are still on the run. We're trying to get them extradited. There have been some successful attempts at retrieving some of the money that's still in South Africa, retrieving the money from companies which did corrupt deals through the state-owned agencies, enterprises at the time. So but there's no prosecutions as yet of any of the authors of this crime which this story relates to. But we are hopeful that it won't be long. There's a very talented team of prosecutors, special unit that have brought in some of the best talent in the country, of solicitors and advocates and so on. So making sure that these cases are watertight, because as the director of the public prosecutions has said, when you go for the king, you better make sure you go for the kill, because if you are unable to do that, they will return and kill you in turn. So the case has to be watertight. The Commission of Inquiry is still ongoing. It should wrap up its business. There's been continued revelations which I think affirm the main thrust of the argument that this was a political project at the highest level. The corruption continues unabated. We've seen it 5 billion rands, which is equivalent of $500 million in South Africa in international currency, US dollars. has been lost during the tenders that were put out for PPE, personal protective equipment. We are demanding oversight with the vaccine acquisition and vaccine rollout. I'm hoping that will be the case to undermine any further attempts to pocket the money that's meant to save lives in the midst of this terrible pandemic we're facing. Well, this film is being shown in Switzerland, which is, I think, excellent. A big part of the problem that we are facing, particularly in the global north, is a landscape of financial institutions, many of which sit in Switzerland, where the jurisdiction of we don't know who owns these companies that are raking in all this money, and they're protected by financial laws in specific jurisdictions, Hong Kong, Dubai, and Switzerland, and increasingly the UK being the main culprits. So this is a global story which demands a global response, and we need utter transparency as to the financial information behind account holders. Without it, we will be unable to get the perpetrators of this crime, of these crimes which are taking place around the world, and in our country, and in many others outside of Africa and Europe, the US, and so on. We're seeing massive amounts of money being lost to illegal, illicit transactions, international transactions, much of it ending up in Swiss bank accounts. So I'd appeal to you, the audience, to get involved and not only join the conversation, join the action. Thank you.